Well, good morning or good afternoon to everybody who's joining us today for this webinar. We're really pleased to have you joining us, and also it's our pleasure to be able to introduce Bob Edwards, the hop coach, who's going to be talking to us today. Bob has been instrumental to us, to our team, and to our journey at Southpack International and at the HOPLAB. We've been working with Bob for 8 years, and it's been an enormous pleasure to be able to work with him, but also to be able to welcome him here back to Australia again. He more or less is an honorary Australian now, and we're pleased to have been able to play a part in that, Bob. So this guide today, Bob's Guide to Operational Learning, is a nod to Bob's book. Bob's very self-deprecating and won't promote his own work or his own book, and I respect that enormously, but his book is available on Amazon, so I would certainly recommend checking that out. But we look forward to some time with you, Bob, 45 minutes or so to talk about your approach and your learnings around operational learning. And of course, then we have time allocated at the end for people's questions and thoughts as well. So please feel free to submit your questions through the question function or the chat function, and we'll make sure there's plenty of time at the end, so you can submit them. So Bob, the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing from you.
Good, Andy, thanks. And thanks for having me here. It's always a pleasure to be here. Very first drink I get when I get into the country is Aussie Flat White. Probably, I guess, now my favorite coffee. So it's really good to be here. I'd share a few thoughts with you. Actually, I'd kind of like to modify it a bit as we're going through some of these basic concepts around operational learning. Anybody who has questions, go ahead and throw them on the Q&A, throw them in the chat, and let's just make this as much of a discussion as we possibly can. I know there's a lot of people logged in, but we'll get to as many of the questions as possible, because that's really what I want to do. I kind of want to know where you're at, what you're doing, what's making sense, what's not, what are you maybe struggling with, anything we can help with along the way. And I'll just kind of kick us off with a bit of a review or reminder of why we're even doing this stuff. Human and organizational performance has kind of been around as a thing for about 12-ish years. And I had the fortune of being at a large company in the US, General Electric at the time. As GE, Chevron, and Alcoa kind of really got a lot of stuff in motion in the US. And pretty quickly we really liked this HOP, we call it HOP, right? We liked a lot of the thinking in there. A whole lot of the thinking made sense. But we also realized we had some things we needed to change pretty quickly. We realized that our investigations were basically patterned after a police investigation, which is terrible, because it wasn't a crime. Actually, it was a workplace incident or a workplace event or a quality issue or operational upset. And so we began to, very early on with Todd Conklin coming into my site, we had an incident, and he suggested that we try to learn from it instead of doing an investigation or an interrogation. And that was my first exposure in around 2012 with the concept of operationally learning, like have a learning team, if you will. So the learning team is just a thing. It's a way to do operational learning. But I wanted to back us up just a second and say, why are we even doing any of this stuff? Well, we found in industry, and we find in industry that we've kind of missed, a lot of us anyway, I certainly had, missed a deeper understanding of complexity and how complex work is and what all people have to do to get their job done, and that things rarely go to plan. And so we realized that if we could start to maybe think a little differently, it moved us into a space to where we started to learn differently. And that's this notion of operational learning. And if we learn differently, then we're actually going to start to build and design work differently. Because I say this all the time, if we don't change the way work is getting done, we're going to probably get the same thing we're getting or worse. Because in the world of complexity, which is work, I don't think we get to stand still. I think we're pressing forward, we're learning, we're understanding the challenges and trying to make things better. I think if we sort of stop and say, I think we figured this out, I believe we're actually backing up. So I think the powerful thing here is the capacity to learn not just what has happened, but what is happening. So this is not another program. You have enough programs, maybe you have too many programs. If you're like me, you have program fatigue. So human and organizational performance is really bringing together three big bodies of knowledge. It's the notion of complexity. We talk a lot about complex systems in the world of work, which is humans and systems interacting together. We talk a lot about sort of the systems thinking or engineering better ways to do the work, better tools, better methods, better approaches, better processes, knowing that the human is going to mess up. So let's not kid ourselves about that. People make mistakes all the time. So how do we understand behavior? That's that organizational and behavioral psychology. How do we understand behavior more so than how do we change behavior? So in the HOP world, we're not really setting out to change behavior. We're trying to understand behavior and then build systems that are more tuned to the human and the human condition. So that's what we're doing with all this, is those three big bodies of knowledge. And a huge part of it is this notion of learning. How do we learn from those closest to the work? Now, many of you have seen along the way one of our sense-making models, which we call black line, blue line. Your black line is your plan, and then, of course, your blue line is reality. Now, we started out in this HOP space using what we would call the Human Performance Department of Energy drift model, which would show the plan, and then it would show the line drifting from the plan, and then that would intersect with hazards and cause a bad day. Well, as we did more and more operational learning, we realized most of the time people aren't drifting from the plan. They're actually managing all the variability around the plan. We still for years had that sort of hazard line creeping up on us until about a year ago. We had done so much operational learning that we realized the hazards really aren't creeping up on us. That blue line for the most part means we're successful, but the red line of hazards are kind of out there all the time. So that kind of opened up a new way of looking at it. Work's not inherently safe, work's inherently dangerous. Everything inside a pipe wants to get out. Electricity is always looking for a ground path. Pretty sure everything on top of that cabinet wants to hit me in the head. I know everything on the ground is trying to trip me. So when we started to realize the hazards are sort of everywhere, it changed the conversation again. So this is the latest version of black line, blue line. If you're interested, we actually show the black line is still the plan, and there's lots of plans. The blue line, actually, there's lots of blue lines. There's lots of variability and really lots of different hazards. But it's when a bunch of those things come together that we have a bad day. So our goal is to get better at learning from what we would call the masters of the work, or the masters of the blue line. What does work really truly look like? And that was the birthplace of really this notion of operational learning. So learning teams is a way. We'll talk about that a bit. We just have an hour together. But I wanted to start by sharing what we consider to be sort of key ingredients of operational learning, because these key ingredients can be used in any conversation. And then I'd like to hear your thoughts. What are you dealing with? What are you struggling with? What's frustrating to you? What's making sense and what's not? So if you already have some questions you're thinking about, go ahead and drop them into the Q&A or to chat. Katie's monitoring both of those. I see one of them up here, but she'll make sure I hear them as soon as you start to load in the end. But I do want to share with you first these basic ingredients. The first one is, in order to do any kind of operational learning, it has to be safe to talk. It has to be a safe place to talk. It has to be a safe conversation. The technical sort of academic phrase for that is psychological safety. Now, I don't really use, I'm an old maintenance manager and I'm an old engineer, and I don't really use the term psychological safety other than I read about it and research it, but then I apply it. And when I apply it, it sounds more like this. It's got to be the way we have the conversation and even where we have the conversation. It's got to feel safe. It's got to be a safe place to talk. Even when we're kicking off a learning team, for example, I love to have a leader come in and say, hey, this is a learning team. You're a part of this learning team to help us learn. We're not here to blame anybody or punish anybody, because quite honestly, that hasn't really helped us much along the way, if at all. And this is a safe place to talk. So psychological safety or safe place to talk, that's probably the most important thing when it comes to operational learning, because people have to be able to tell you what it really takes to get the work done, that blue line, without fear of retribution or fear of being sacked. So first and foremost, it's got to be safe. Secondly, when we're facilitating any conversation or leading any sort of conversation, we have to be curious. I guess Edgar Schein would have said it's humble inquiry. Once again, a very academic term. Read anything you can that Edgar Schein wrote. He's brilliant. He was brilliant. passed away last year. It worked right up to the end. He's like 92 years old, still helping clients get better at this. So being teachable, being curious, if you leave our little hour together more curious, we've had a really, really good hour together. And so this notion of curiosity versus judgment, judgment's easy. When something bad happens, we're all just the smartest person in the room, aren't we? And what we want here is to actually be more curious, knowing that in most cases, people did not come to work to mess that up or to break it or to have that quality escape or to get injured. Most people come to work to do a good job. Even those grouchy old maintenance guys on my team, I hate it here. How long you been here? 30 years. Well, they don't really hate it. It's like to complain about it. Reality is most people come to work to do a decent job. So be curious about what it takes to get the work done, but then also be teachable. It's not our job to know everything. It's our job to be curious. And then this notion of learning, slow down a minute and learn first. Learning is powerful. Learning is doing something. If you happen to work at a site that does a lot of lean manufacturing stuff, and I'm a big fan of lean technologies and methods, the 7 steps for problem solving in lean actually starts with define your problem. We would say make it 8 steps. Learn first. And lean teachers go to the Gemba or go to the shop floor to learn. But oftentimes we sort of brush past that quickly and start defining our problems and fixing things. In the hop space, we believe it's very, very valuable to slow down and learn. Learning is doing something, and then give the conversation some breathing room. If you can, even like with a learning team, we love to give like overnight soak time. Or as my Aussie friends over in Perth told me, they would call it a SOCO, which I think is a cooler name than soak time. But let people sort of think about it for a minute. And then define your problems after you've done really sort of deep, rich learning. Now, another thing I would say is I find very valuable is team generated ideas. People from a learning team, for example, or from the conversation I'm having, what do they want to do about it? Because I actually have a couple of engineering degrees, not that you care, but oftentimes I think I need to solve a problem when in fact, maybe I need to be more curious and more teachable and be really sort of inquire or be curious about what the team wants to do. They oftentimes have the best ideas. So there's what we would consider sort of essential ingredients for doing operational learning. So I already see a question coming over here. It says, how do we apply learning teams to resolve broader business issues beyond safety, such as quality, management issues, or project lessons learned? Yeah, perfect. So we realized, we started when I was in GE, we started in safety. I don't know why, it just seemed like a good thing to do. But very quickly, we realized this same approach can be used for a quality escape. We used one for an inventory miss one time. We had like a $5 million inventory miss. It wasn't safety. It wasn't even quality. It was an inventory miss. That's money. And when we did the same thing, we brought together the people that manage all the parts and the rejected parts and the returns and whatever. And we had them teach us about just how complex their world is, messing with all of those rejected and damaged and returned parts, only to find out that in fact, there were 3 big areas where failures could happen in that system that would lead us to a $5 million inventory miss. So you can use this approach with anything. And I would even say this, I think rarely, if ever, do I see truly a safety problem anyway. I think safety issues are sort of an outcome from some sort of an operational struggle or an operator struggle. So regardless of what the outcome is, a quality escape, an operational upset, we lost productivity, or somebody was injured. Those to me are all outcomes indicating that there's some brittleness in the system. So learning teams are great for unlocking that brittleness, because who knows the brittleness better than anybody else? People close to the work. So if I can build a safe place for them to talk to me about the brittleness, we can learn about all sorts of challenges out there that lead to safety, quality, operational upsets. I've done maybe close to as many learning teams on sort of quality issues or operational upsets as I have on safety over the years. Safety was just a good place to start, I think, because I think everybody wants people to go home safely. So that seemed like a logical place to start. And then we started in the past several years, we started doing like very successful work. I did a learning team at a site that team had won Project of the Year award. There's like a local internal newsletter had a big article on them, had a big trophy on the shelf, and they were literally awarded for great performance. And they said, hey, can we learn about just how great that was? And they asked themselves this question: were we lucky or were we good? And then we just unlocked the mess around that project. Anytime you're willing to talk about the real deal, you'll find it to be quite messy. And so they found out, in fact, they were actually really, really good at what they did, but in two places, they were like one defense away or one safeguard away from really potentially pretty bad failure. And oh, by the way, this is a site that tests like big, dangerous weapons. And so to be able to unlock that and understand, wow, we were close to not being the best project ever in two places there. We had some brittleness in the system, and that was trophy awarded success. So to your question, I think you can use learning teams for any sort of operational struggle. For those of you in the lean world, you might have done value stream maps. So think about how much work you have to do to prepare for a value stream map. We've used learning teams to do like an ad hoc value stream map. You just bring together the people that manage that value stream, whatever it is, and you just literally learn from them. And as we talk through, just like you would do with all the pre-work, instead of doing the pre-work, just bring them together to teach you about the sort of stream of work that they manage. And we found from that several areas that needed sort of a deep dive learning team. So we've done that. It's way less painful than a traditional value stream map. I've done plenty of those, and they're helpful, but it seems so much easier to just bring people together that manage that stream of work as it flows from start to finish. And from that conversation, I've actually done quite a few of these. We unlock like error traps, and we unlocked waste, like all the different 7 wastes of lean. We unlocked confusion points and complexity issues, and this interaction of sort of variability, and we learn all that just by bringing people together to learn from them instead of trying to pre-study how they do the work. We actually bring them together. So hopefully that answers your question, at least enough for you to feel encouraged to go give it a try, because the learning team process it's not a difficult process. And we designed it to be, the process is pretty straightforward because the story of work is going to be a mess. So I don't need a challenging process that's hard to even understand, that I need a quality degree to be able to manage the investigation process. The process we put together for learning teams is pretty straightforward. And if you haven't seen it, I can share it with you real quick. We put it in here. Let me get to it here. There it is. So what we do with the learning team is we bring people together that know the work, masters of the blue line, if you will. We take about an hour of their time and we just learn as much as we can. We don't try to fix anything. Now, I love to give them a SOCO overnight and then come back together for another hour the next day and keep learning. Now, usually with learning teams, I do 3, sometimes 4 sessions, but always at least 2. Because with the learning team approach, we want to give them soak time, let them come back together, make sure we've actually gained an understanding of the work. And here's how you know you've gained an understanding. Let's say an event has happened. I don't know, a quality escape. And in the past, we would have written somebody up or retrained them or put something up in their file. Instead of doing all that stuff, we bring that team together that does the work, and we learn like the challenges of the work, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what all they have to deal with. And we reach a point to where we're like, I get it. I understand how that failure happened. That's gaining an understanding. See, if I'm still looking at them and saying, yeah, but I wouldn't have done what you did, that is hindsight biased. Because remember, after something bad happens, we're all geniuses. We all know what we should have done in hindsight. But I want to gain an understanding to where it actually makes sense that I'd have done similar, or maybe even the exact same thing. That's gaining an understanding. And then I come up with problem statements. So rather than start with the problem statement, let's start with learning. So any of you who've been around a while, you've done all sorts of different action workouts and problem solving events. You can even take the ones the way you're doing them now, perhaps, and say, let's make sure before we jump into defining problems, we actually learn first. So if you learn first, the problem statements actually emerge from the conversation. And then once we've defined our problems, what we want to work on, kind of prioritize what we think we want to do, then we use some sort of improvement cycle. This is one we put together. You can use whatever. You can use the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act. You can use the DMAIC, design, measure, analyze, improve, control. We like this notion of try-storming. It actually comes from lean. We like to try out our ideas without spending a bunch of money first. And then we make some improvements, test it, see if it holds up. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And then do we need to check back in a few months to see if it's still working or if we need to change again? So that process that I just put in front of you, that is what we would call a learning team cycle, if you will. And that it's not hard, but it is important. Like I can tell you this, I've done hundreds and hundreds of these things. I've been exposed now to thousands of learning teams over the past 12 years. Soak time has never failed me. So giving people, I'd rather have a couple of shorter sessions and give them some soak time than to drag it out in some long all day effort to where everybody's exhausted and you just don't give your brain a chance to process it enough. So soak time is a physiological thing that works and we highly recommend it. We also recommend you learn first and then figure out what you want to work on. And you may not want to call them problem statements. That's an engineering term. You may just want to ask the team, hey, what do you folks want to work on? What needs some help here? Same thing. Like I would not over formalize this. I would keep this much more like a conversation at a picnic table so that people are comfortable and teaching me so that I can learn rather than the traditional sort of interrogation. And I'm not worried about people getting together and trying to come up with the same story because this is not an interrogation. It's not an investigation. I know everybody's stories are going to be different because they always are. People see things differently. So with the learning team, you're not worried about one story. You want everybody's stories. They all matter. They all come together to help build sort of the mosaic, if you will, of how the work gets done.
Bob, I might just jump in. Sorry.
Yep.
There's one Q&A that's quite relevant to what you're covering now. So I thought maybe we answer it now before we move on. But someone anonymous has said, do learning teams have to have corrective actions or things to do? Can learning be the only outcome? So it's kind of relevant to this section you're talking on now. So I thought maybe answer to that now before we move on to some of the more there's some really great general questions coming through as well.
Absolutely. And that's a really good question. But actually, I think there's one that's more important. Didn't flat whites originate in New Zealand? Oh my word. Somebody just blew Kurt. You just blew my mind.
I don't know. I was going to say, I don't know if you're qualified to answer that. You're qualified to answer a lot of things, but in this webinar, I don't know.
8 years, ever since my first trip over here, when Andy Schoen said, hey, have you ever heard of a flat white coffee? And he made one for me. I've loved them ever since. And I've 100% given credit to the Aussies. So I may have said as false. Katie, I don't know. All right.
I'm not getting involved.
I'm going to stick to my Aussie flat white. Yeah. So the question is sometimes learning. Well, there have been situations where we literally just needed to learn. We almost always get ideas. I would say 99% of the time we get ideas from the team to make it better. But I would say there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, we don't even know if we need to fix anything yet. Let's use an operational learning approach or a learning team and just gain as much context as we can. I think it's perfect. That might even be a really good way if you're like working on a design of a new process or a new piece of equipment or a new tool or a widget or whatever. That might be a good idea to just bring people together. I've done that several times on design issues where there wasn't necessarily a problem. They just said, hey, we're going to design a new vessel of some sort, ship in one case, and they just spent time learning so that when they started to create this new ship with a very specific task it had to do, they had the voice of the captain, the deckhands, the maintenance, the deck crew, the people that are actually going to operate this thing. So they weren't necessarily getting like solutions so much as they were getting an understanding of what it takes to operate the deck or to operate the ship. So I think yes, the answer is yes. You can do a learning team just as long as whoever's sponsoring it knows, hey, we're going to do a couple of sessions here just simply to learn. But I do say this all the time: learning is doing something. Like that is, it used to be, what are you going to fix? What are you going to fix? What are you going to fix? We even had a whole find it, fix it mentality, which means we didn't stop to really think about much. We just jumped on it and fixed it and moved on. And this is actually doing what Dr. Deming, the quality guru back in the 70s, tried to get us to do this, to slow down and learn. And this is actually taking time to pump those brakes and slow down and learn. So I think you're 100% correct. You can do this just simply to learn.
It might just lead into Ian's question too, Bob. He said, how do you keep people in the learning cycle long enough? People often want to jump to solutions right away. So right as you were saying just now, are there any tactics for saying, hold on, hold fire, we'll get to that?
Yeah, Katie, I sort of set the ground rules, even not rules. I'm from America, so I don't really like rules, but the guidance, right, for the learning team. We're going to take an hour, and I tell them that I was like, hey, I need you just to teach me everything you can in an hour. And remember, if you're facilitating a learning team, if you're going to be an expert at anything, be an expert at curiosity. Like, you're not the expert at the work. That's why they're there. So just if it starts to drift, and it does, if it starts to drift into, hey, we need to do this or we need to do that, I'll just say I appreciate that, but don't rush me there yet. Make sure I have a deep understanding of the work. So fall back on myself and my lack of knowledge to say, hey, please keep teaching me for at least for this first hour. And when you do that, it'll self-correct. Even if somebody says, well, we need more time clocks, or we need a new tires on that ute or whatever, then people even will self-correct in the learning team. Like, all right, hold on, that's the solution. Let's save that for tomorrow. So the reason we do that is because if you start solving in that first session, I know because I've messed this up, the learning drops off really quickly. So I want to take time to learn. And so let's not solve in that first session. So maybe you lay it out as a sort of an expectation. We're going to just learn for an hour. Also keep these things short. Rarely have I done a learning team longer than an hour. Here's a reason. You don't need to. If you get a conversation started and people are talking with each other and they're talking to you, and I use flip charts or whiteboards and just write the stuff on the walls, right? So it's very, very transparent. There's nothing hidden. I'm not typing it in a computer or writing it on a notepad. There's our conversation right on the wall. When they leave, I already know this because I hear it. When they leave, they're still talking about it. I can't even tell you how many times in like the second session, somebody says, we was talking back in the control room about this. I was with the guys out in the field and they said, hey, don't forget about the problem we have with, yeah. So see, the learning goes on. When you kick off a conversation and people realize you're not investigating them, you're not interrogating them, then it starts to create even more of a conversation. Even after they've left, they're still talking. So then when they come together in that second session, it's never failed me. They always have new things to teach me. And as a facilitator, I always have new things I'm curious about. Like, it's never failed me. There's not a single time in the hundreds that I've done that soak time didn't work. Every single time. And sometimes really crazy stuff comes out of the second session. Sometimes just a few tidbits here or there, but it's always valuable to slow down and learn and not fix in that first session. So I hope that helps. Like, don't be mean. Don't say, shut up. Don't give me solutions. I just say, hey, hold on. Keep teaching me. Don't fix yet. Because I need you guys to keep teaching me, making sure I understand the work. What's next, Katie?
Okay, we've got a good one. There was another couple about learning teams, so I'll stick on that track. Someone anonymous has said, do you need to be trained or an experienced facilitator to run a learning team? So I think that's a good point. There is some more further down around where the Southpack offers training and this type of thing. So I'll just answer those in the Q&A as well. But certainly, if you wanted to speak, Bob, in terms of the experience you need to facilitate a learning team, what would you say to that?
Yes, I also want to real quickly address the fact that this is a question I get a lot about the red line. Yeah, the red line's a dashed line because we step over it, around it. Maybe it's guarded, maybe it's not. So the problem with how we had it, and this comes all the way back from the Department of Energy, they had the black line, and then they call it drift, the drift model. You drifted from the plan, and the hazards crept up on you, and where that intersection happened, boom, you had an incident. So we've done so much operational learning that we realize the hazards are everywhere. Some of them are protected against, some of them are really well protected. Some of them are just right there. We're outmaneuvering them every day. So we do show it as a dash line to say, hey, it's not like it every time you impact it, but it's not just hazards, it's hazardous conditions, it's risk, it's just the stuff in work that can cause a problem. Eric Hollnagel doesn't even show the hazard line. he just shows lots and lots and lots and lots of blue lines. And he says with enough of that variability kind of comes together and it underperforms, you have a bad day. So he didn't even show a hazard line. We still show it because there are things. I mean, I'm an old maintenance manager. There's a lot of stuff out there that can hurt you for sure. But Eric Hollnagel is not wrong. There's just a ton of it. It's just the variability stacking up against us. I was on an aircraft carrier recently, and in order to line those jets up, they have to stand right over top of that launch mechanism. And while they're lining up the next aircraft, that launch shuttle comes right between that young sailor's feet. If he or she is ever standing over by half a meter, it'll break their foot, probably break their foot off. So it's built right into the most advanced aircraft carrier on planet Earth. So hazards are everywhere. So hopefully that helps a bit. The challenge is that because we started with the drift model, and that was the blue line of work and the red line connect, boom, you have an incident. But then we started realizing there's actually more about variability than it is drift, because drift indicates you had a perfect plan, which nobody has a perfect plan. And variability seems to be more accurate. That definitely ties together with Eric Hollnagel's work. And then we still had that hazard line creeping up on us, but actually we designed in hazards. There's not a single work process I've ever seen anywhere that didn't have things that, yep, got to be careful around that part of it. There's hardly any way you could do it without having the hazards being around you. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And you can still, if you don't like that model, you don't have to use Eric Hollnagel's model. We just changed it. And actually, I've only had 2 people push back against it and say, we're not going to use it. One of them was somebody who said, we do not design in hazards. And I'm like, well, you're the first. And the other one was a guy who said, I just printed out 5,000 hard hat stickers, or 500 or whatever, a whole bunch of them that were the previous model. Bob, why'd you change it? I'm like, well, you use whatever you want to. The main thing is I would highly recommend moving away from the drift model, because the drift model is insulting to the worker. In other words, the only reason the bad thing happened was because you drifted from my perfect plan. So we only used that for a few years before we moved and created sort of that variability model. So hopefully that helped a little bit. Do whatever you want to. There's some people that use the dash line and they actually make a gap when it crosses the blue line. It's just a sense making model, that's all. But all we're saying is that the hazards are actually a lot more prevalent and a lot more out there every day than what we would like to believe. And so maybe that helps us a bit with our conversation. Now back to what was your question again? Oh yeah, skill set, right?
Yeah, the experience of the facilitator. In your opinion, what's needed there?
I think the most important thing, bar none, the most important thing is genuine curiosity. If you are a curious person and you really want to learn and understand, you'll be a great facilitator. That's it. Because if you're really truly curious, then even when someone says, we don't lock that out on third shift anymore, you won't freak out. You'll say, all right, well, teach me more. What's going on? What does it look like? Well, we don't have any maintenance on third shift, and we got to keep that press running because the parts are needed in the morning. So see, even your curiosity will carry you past judgment, even if somebody says they're not following the rules correctly. So I'd say the number one thing is be teachable and be curious. And if you're that, you'll do great. And if you have to have a list of questions, this probably is not the right approach for you, because I don't have a list of questions ever for operational learning. Every single conversation I have is new. It's interesting. My curiosity carries me through the conversation. So hopefully that helps. You don't need a PhD in psychology, or you don't need to be a counselor on the weekend. No, none of that. It's just being able to set judgment aside, not be judgmental, but be truly curious. And then also, like I think it helps to be able to tell people what they're teaching you. It shows you're listening. So be a good listener. Listen to learn, not listen to respond. And we all struggle with that. I know I do. Oftentimes I'm listening, only getting ready to respond, as opposed to listening to learn. So that's what I'd say. I think it all wraps around curiosity, or centers up around it. If anybody tells you have to have a certification, they're wrong. I should say that. It's me. I'm just saying, I helped create this. I've been involved with this from the beginning, and there's no certification process for being curious. Curiosity is it's a human characteristic. If you foster it, you get better at it. That I know for sure. My wife, some of you folks know I have 12 kids, 12 adopted kids. My wife has even told me, she said, on your journey in this hop work, you actually are much more curious about our children's world, like when they're dealing with things and struggling things. She said, you seek to understand them better than I've ever seen you in the past. Now, she hasn't said that about her yet, but I've only been married 42 years, so give me a minute. I'm working on it.
Still time.
That's right. Hopefully.
There's another couple of quick ones that might be good while we're still on learning teams. One I like from Carmel. Do learning teams always need to go across 2 days, or can the soak time be just a few hours? So I think maybe you've got a good answer to that. But also another one from Adam. Can and should learning teams be recorded? That's an interesting one. I think be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so let's start with the recording one. Yeah, absolutely not. Right? If it's a psychologically safe place, yeah, I've never recorded a learning team ever. Not with a tape recorder, not with a video, not with, I mean, the story gets written on the flip charts. There's the story of the work. I don't write people's names down on them. I don't say, well, then Katie said this at 3 o'clock, because it's not an investigation. It's just simply the story of work. So it's very transparent. Lean actually taught us that. Be transparent when you do continuous improvement events. Put it all up there for people to see. Nothing's hidden, nothing's scary and, you know, being typed into some memo for somebody. So I would say, yeah, don't record it all ever. The story is going to be up on the wall as you write it down as you go. What was the other question, Katie? You know, you can't throw two at me at the same time. I don't have that.
Sorry, I'm not going to do that again.
Well, you can. It just
learning-
makes it fun for you. It's hard for me.
Do learning teams always need to go across 2 days, or can the soak time be just a few hours?
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, you can do operational learning in any conversation. It can be one conversation, it can be 10 conversations. It can be every morning in your pre-production meeting or whatever, right? Or every end of the day at your post job briefing. But the learning team itself, that concept, if you can, I'm just telling you from experience, I'm not some psychologist, give them overnight. Because physiologically, when you sleep on it, your brain processes it. You've all had this happen where you wake up in the morning and go, oh my goodness, we should have talked about this, or I didn't even think about this yesterday. So you could do it over lunch. It's not near as good. And sometimes you have to do it over lunch because I don't have the time to do it any other way. And people maybe came in from the field to do this. But you can, I don't really like to do this, but I've done it quite a bit actually. It's because of stupid COVID. We got pretty good at doing some of these sessions virtually. I've done a lot of them with power companies because the linemen, they're all over the county. And it's actually kind of easier to just say, hey, jump on your smart tablet and help us sort this mess out. So I still would rather give them overnight soak time if you can. I can tell you, I've done a bunch of them both ways, and it just definitely brings more depth to the conversation if you can. And maybe even this, maybe you say, okay, we have them, they're coming into the office to do learning teams. We're going to do a session in the morning, a session in the afternoon, and then tell everybody, hey, 2 days from now, if you could log on, we're going to do another session just to see what we missed, right? You could, I mean, adapt however you want to, but the soak time overnight is really, really powerful. It works. I mean, it's something about when you go to sleep, your brain's sorting it out. And we even do this sometimes when we're coming up with different ideas, we'll give them some soak time on that one. And we find that it helps as well, even when you're in like the idea generation phase of this thing. So hopefully that helps a little bit. You can do whatever you want to do with it. You'll see. And here's another thing, try it out. So do a learning team where you just have a SOCO over lunch, and then do another one where you give them overnight and see if you see a difference. Like nobody's got this all figured out. We're figuring it out together. I've done this a bunch, and it really seems to help to give them overnight SOCO if you can.
Perfect. You also answered Scott's question inadvertently. Can a learning team be effectively conducted over Zoom/Teams? It seems not. Well, you did give a really good example there of when it is appropriate to do it on Zoom/Teams, obviously.
Yeah. And we've had to do them, Katie, because in some cases, like there's just no way to get to the folks. And during COVID, we had, because this didn't slow down during COVID. Matter of fact, this kind of kicked into high gear because they were trying to work through so many problems and couldn't get to the actual workers, right? So I don't like to do them. I call it the computer hole, through the computer hole. But you just have to be more sort of deliberate about like everybody has their own, if it's all possible, everybody should be on their own like computer, not everybody sitting in a room and you on the computer somewhere else. It seems to help if you can see each other. Still have a leader come in and kick it off and then kick themselves out so you can talk. Have the leader come back and tie in again and let's tell them what we learned. You can do all those same things. It is harder with it in the virtual world, but it can certainly be done. And in some cases, it has to be done that way.
Thanks. I might jump onto another really interesting question from Tanya Curtin. Thanks, Tanya, for the questions. You've been really great so far. But I really like this one. Do you have any suggestions for guiding / managing learning team participants who get fixated on finding fault at the individual level? So potentially we're getting into the blame accountability space here.
Right. So any of you who are even remotely familiar with human and organizational performance, like our 5 principles we talk about, the first one is that people make mistakes. We know that nobody's perfect, and the systems aren't perfect, and the procedures aren't perfect, and the equipment's not perfect. That's what we call work. We call that work. But then our second principle is that blame's not going to fix it. And I know people blame. I mean, all of us do. I blame myself when I mess up. We just, when it comes up in this conversation, sometimes it'll be even someone in the learning team blaming some other department. Well, maintenance always does this and never does that. The tool crib, they're always like, I'll just literally say, all right, so I hear your frustration, but you know, they've got a blue line they're on as well. And I'm betting they didn't come to work to make your day miserable. I mean, they might have, but I'm going to guess that they didn't. And so when people start to blame, I just give them a little bit of a nudge and say, hey, let's try to focus more on the problems we're dealing with here. Because if we just start blaming each other, we'll make no progress at all. And when you do operational learning, and when you're leading a learning team, just remember I bring a lot of passion to what I do, but I don't bring my feelings. Like it's hard to hurt my feelings. So if someone says, well, they're always being stupid. Actually, I had this happen. I was doing operational learning in some control rooms at a refinery. And several of these different control rooms, they were very open and very, like they were glad to have someone that was like listening to them. And I was at one particular one, and this guy just got angry with me. He said, I don't know who you are or what this is, but I'm sick and tired of all this. You know, they say they're going to do something different. They never do it. And you're not going to make a difference either. And just kind of really was pretty aggressive towards me. And I let him kind of vent. And then I looked at him and I said, you know, I appreciate the fact that you're angry and frustrated about the fact that they're not, you know, you've said things like this before and nothing's changed. I really don't blame you for being aggravated. And I told him this. I said, I'll take your aggravation and I'll also take somebody's positive hope that something will be better. I'll take either one of those over apathy. What scares me is apathy, like a person that literally no longer cares. I said, the fact that you're angry with me, first of all, I don't blame you if you've not been heard. I don't blame you at all. But also, I'll take that anger and that frustration over you reaching a point of apathy. Because if you no longer care at all, we've lost. We don't stand a chance of getting better. So the fact that you still care enough to be angry, I'll take that. So I've had many situations where people were frustrated and I try to hear their frustration and then validate that I get it, that I understand it, but then okay, now let's start to move forward. But I don't let them get into blaming each other and pointing. You just, you know, to facilitate these, you have to pull that in and say, hey guys, we're here to learn from each other. I know you're frustrated. I know you're aggravated, but let's talk about like more of what it takes to actually get the work done. I hope that helps a little bit.
There's still on learning teams, but there's another good one here from Richard DeLuca. I have a tendency to apply learning teams after an event. What tips do you suggest to deploy to promote learning teams proactively, i.e. before the event, to get the issues to surface that are unspoken or underground? That might be a good one.
Yep. And there it is right there. Set me up for that slide, didn't you? Nice job. So that it's out there all the time. The stuff that's out there that leads to failure is also out there when we've had success. And a lot of times success is just a bunch of the variables working in our favor. So the more we do this, actually several years ago now, there were different places we were doing this, like Chevron, for example. And the more we talked about the learning teams around an event, we realized all the stuff that they're talking about that led to that event actually sounded like pretty normal, like it's out there all the time. So you're onto something really, whoever just asked that question, you're onto something very powerful. The notion of learning from successful work or learning from normal work. What happened with us is even when an event happened, I kept finding myself drawn to learning about normal work first. And when I learned about normal work first, even though an event brought us together, I started to realize, man, the stuff that led to that event sounds like stuff that's out there all the time. And to them anyway, maybe it's new and challenging for me to wrap my brain around, but to the people that do the work, they're like, yeah, it's kind of like this all the time. And so that's what led us into this, learn even when you haven't had an event and you might get ahead of some of them. One of the complexity scientists, I like his work, his name's Holland, last name's Holland. He said, one of the most powerful things you can do to steer your organization away from those sticky, right? Stuff that can kill you, or stabby, as we say, stuff that can bankrupt you, to steer you away from those really dangerous, horrible things is your ability to learn. And as my work partner, Andy, says, to learn what is happening. Not just what has happened. We can learn that for sure. But when you learn what is happening, that means you can study successful work, and people close to the work can share with you those things that they're dealing with out there every day, and actually mostly successfully. And isn't it cool to be able to learn and improve without the event? When a bad event happens, we have to learn. If we don't, it's a cost to the business. It's a cost to us personally, emotionally, our organization, right? If something bad happens and we don't learn, then it was just a horrid cost. But if we can learn when there's been no event, that's investment in the future. Because humans aren't very good at predicting, but we're really good at learning if we choose to be. So I think you're onto something very powerful. Learn when there's been no event. And when Chevron started realizing that, I use them as an example a lot. They didn't say we need to do more learning teams on successful work, because they don't have a metric on that. They just monitor whether learning teams are events, near misses, quality escapes, successful, normal, everyday work. And over the period of several years now, they do more learning teams on successful work, and they unlock the brittleness in the system without the failure. Because you guys know this, you folks know this. If you're in this hop space, you already realize all accidents are not preventable. They never have been. So we have to get better at learning so that we can get ahead of some of these, or at least build enough sort of mitigation strategies, or build enough mitigation into the system that not if, but when we don't have a catastrophic failure. So learning from successful work can get us in that space. We can get ahead of some of this stuff. And I've got, just lots and lots of stories of where we studied successful work and found out that, man, we came really, really close to having a bad day there. And in some cases didn't even know it. By the way, if I don't answer your question correctly, or like it doesn't make sense, just say, okay, still got another question.
Perfect. There's a couple of really good sort of more general ones, I think, in terms of shifting perceptions in the workplace, but there's a couple of, that were early on from a couple of anonymous people that are similar, that like, do you think there are personalities within leaders and managers that don't want to accept these different ways of thinking? This appears to be a bigger problem in larger organizations. And then quite similarly, how do you manage working with old view clients or stakeholders that are hyper focused on eliminating or downgrading IFR stats to the point of making it worse for the worker? So just a couple of questions, I guess, around old view of thinking, or people who are not willing to come on board with the new view of thinking. Any suggestions around dealing with that or trying to change that?
Yeah, it'd be nice, Kate, if we could give them like the Matrix red pill, the reality pill. Although I wish it was the blue pill. Wouldn't it be perfect if the Matrix had lined up with our black line, blue line? I'll need to get with Hollywood and straighten that out. But yeah, it'd be nice if you just give them that red pill of reality. The fact is you can't. And I'll say this, in some cases, they won't move forward. But I rarely give up on people. So I've worked with some pretty ornery, old school thinkers, and I'd like to say old school, except it's actually still very prevalent that all accidents are preventable. If somebody screws up, why didn't you write them up? You should give them a window seat, sack them, get them out of here. Who's my next ex-employee? There's still plenty of those managers around. But what we try to do is we try to find areas in an organization that want to do this differently. And when we started this in GE Appliances, I was the only site. My site was the only site in GE Appliances. And then along comes Monogram Refrigeration. And then along comes Decatur, Alabama, their site. And then comes Gwen Kincaid up there in the warehouse. But there's like 10 or 11 sites, but we had like 4 sites that really were moving with this. And one site we had an old school manager that was to pound his fist on the table, my way or the highway. I've been around. I know. Nobody tells me. We actually did not make much progress with him or his site until he retired. I'd like to say we did, but we didn't. When he retired, we were able to go in there and do some more good. But until then, he ruled with an iron fist, and we couldn't make progress. But I've also seen this. I've also seen some old school people who realized that their old ways. I had this happen in a power company. There's a VP actually, and when he saw this approach and he saw what learning teams were bringing to his organization, and he saw how much in the past he had been he was doing this wrong. He was sacking people. He was writing them up. He actually said to his team, I was there when he said it. He said, I wish I would have known this 30 years ago, but I didn't. But I know it now. And I'm sorry for how I've treated some of you. It was a pretty humbling moment, but he also is pretty powerful, because you will get some breakthroughs with people that you maybe thought would never change, but you'll have some that will never change. And all I can say is that this is like social norms engineering. It is slowly becoming, and maybe not slowly anymore, it's moving pretty quickly. There's now thousands of companies doing this. 12 years ago, there was just a handful. I know, because I knew the handful. There wasn't very many of them. And now there's hundreds, if not thousands, of companies and sites all over the globe doing this. And it is not the new social norm yet, I don't think, but it's fast becoming the new social norm, that blaming and punishing and disciplinary action, that it should really be saved for that less than 1% of the people that don't belong here. They should not be in our organization. But punishing people for messing up in the workplace when they were trying to get work done, not only does it not fix stuff, it drives things underground. And hyper focused on the metrics, people just stop reporting. I have a lot of data around that, where when we opened it up and started talking and bringing stuff forward, our site, even as good as we were, we call it recordable rate. Our recordable rate went up for like 2 years as we did this. But our serious, like our sticky stuff that can kill you, our bad events, they begin to drop and drop and drop. Our workers' comp after 2 years was the lowest we'd ever seen it. So the metrics were changing, but it wasn't going to give us an immediate lower recordable rate, because we were so hyper focused on that number. People had really shut down on recording or reporting. That's not good. That's how companies with low injury rates are the very companies where people are dying. And there's a lot of data around that stuff too as well. So if you have a leader that's not sure they agree with all this, they still think all accidents are preventable, and they still think, rewarding people for not getting hurt is a good idea, you probably should connect them with some of the sites, maybe even within your company, that have worked through this and realize that nobody on planet Earth has punished their way to operational excellence. Nobody. So punishment should only be saved for when you truly have a person problem, which means you remove the person and the problem goes away. You put old Tennessee Bob in that same job and I'm doing it the same way in a couple of weeks, that's probably more of a system problem. So part of it is that we have more context around this, being able to share it with our leaders, getting our leaders to see it and hear it. And you'll see some changes in the leaders. I've seen it a bunch where leaders, they're no longer satisfied with a simple answer. They want to understand the context. They want to understand all those blue lines. They realize that just the fact that Katie pushed the wrong button, oh yeah, that's fine, but that didn't really get us any great understanding of Katie's work until we actually take time to understand the blue lines of variability that she's dealing with. Hopefully that helps a little bit. KPIs and stuff will change, but you can't promise somebody that this is going to give you a lower injury rate. In some cases, they have a low injury rate because nobody's reporting, because they're terrified. They don't want to reset that clock out front that said it's been 732 days since the last accident, and we get to 1,000, everybody gets a Yeti cooler. So some of that stuff will change for sure. Got to be ready for it.
There was a really great one, Bob, that I want to get to, but I know you're going to want to answer this one. What do you say to a company that is convinced that BBS, behavior-based safety, is a solution to challenges?
Well, so behavior-based safety, Krause and Geller and those guys that put all that stuff together, they absolutely meant well with it. The philosophical difference, I think, between HOP and BBS is that In behavior-based safety, a sort of a belief system is that if you get people to change their behavior enough, their belief systems will change. And there's some truth to that. We're more of the Edgar Schein model, whereas if you focus more on your belief systems, right? Respect, treating each other equally, getting rid of the parent-child dynamic and treating adults working together instead of hammering it out against each other, then behavior does change, but it's changing because the belief systems have changed. What we see with sites that are really steeped in BBS. So by the way, BBS is not, it's not in contradiction to HOP. It's not in alliance with HOP. It's a thing. And what we say is that if you have people going out and they're asking questions, maybe take a look at the questions. If the questions are focused more on compliance, well, you're going to get a certain sort of answer. You're also going to get people really aware of when you're coming. I know I'm a maintenance manager. I know when you're coming. So if you're coming out to do an audit, a BBS audit or whatever, I'm going to straighten it up until you leave, and then I'll go back to doing what I was doing. So you can change the questions. We've seen several sites do this. So rather than the BBS questions being centered up on like procedures, procedural adherence, PPE or whatever, and I actually learned this from some lean manufacturing folks. This idea came from them. They said, what if you focus those questions on operator struggle? So you're still going out there, you're still doing your observations, change the questions. Questions are everything, right? The better answers and deeper understanding come from better questions. So if you have a site that's really like this super focused on BBS, say, hey, can we just do a little experiment? Look at the data you're getting now with the questions you ask. And now let's go out and for the next, I'm big on try-storming, big on experimenting. So for the next 3 months, I'm just making something up here. For the next 3 months, let's ask these 5 questions instead of the previous 10 or whatever. And the 5 questions, make them things along the lines of operator struggle. What's challenging? What makes this job easy? What would you be worried about if you brought in your friend to do this job? What would you be concerned about? Right? Getting them to talk about the things that they like or dislike about their job, the things they struggle with, and see if you get different data. If you don't, stick with what you're doing. But if you get better data and you're like, oh my word, we didn't really know about these sort of challenges until we changed the questions. Questions are everything. Like as Cooper Ryder said back in the 80s, questions are not neutral, they're faithful. So if we change our questions, we'll get different answers. So hopefully that helps a little bit. If you've already got a program to go out there and look, experiment with some different questions. They might not fit into your BBS software, so I can't tell you what to do there, but you can certainly look at the answers that you've got in your software tools from the questions that you've been given to ask versus questions you come up with. It's just like surveys. I see so many companies pay a lot of money for these surveys that somebody else writes for them. Like, why are you doing that? What are you curious about? What do you want to know from your people in the field? And what do you want to, what sort of questions do you want to know from your leadership? And several companies on the HOP journey now are creating their own surveys. And why wouldn't they? You know what you're curious about. You ask the questions that you want to know more about. And I've had some people say, well, yeah, but next year they got to be the same questions, right? Well, maybe some of them, but we're so worried about like year-over-year deltas and year-over-year improvement instead of year-over-year learning. So maybe we learned some stuff and we changed some things this year, which actually makes us curious about something else differently. So many of these binary, simple sort of approaches, we challenge them with HOP and try to open up a more contextually rich conversation, which can be pretty messy, but it can sure be helpful.
Thanks, Bob. I was just going to say, we've just got under a minute to wrap up. So, with any closing comments you wanted to make?
Yeah, keep the faith, right? If you're doing this stuff, don't let up. Don't realize that you are why this is happening. Nobody has this figured out. Like, don't follow anybody. I mean, you can learn from anybody and everybody, but nobody has this all figured out. And if they tell you they do, I'd be leery of them because we're all figuring this out together. And I just want to thank any of you that are helping to make work better and make it less likely for somebody to go home harmed physically or emotionally. So thank you for the great work you guys are doing, you folks are doing out there. And thanks for spending an hour with me. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. You can check me out there. Southpack has all kind of good stuff going on. I always love coming over here. And remember, my first flat white was Andy Schoen at Southpack in Australia. So if it's New Zealand, let me at least let me at least have my moment here that this is an Aussie thing that I learned, okay? I do know this, the meat pies in New Zealand are amazing. That's what I got.
Thanks, Bob. And of course, the flat white wasn't the only thing we introduced you to either. I think schmozzle was one of the first few words that you kind of picked up and kind of ran with as well. So every day is a learning day when you were here with the HOPLAB. So thanks very much, Bob. We really appreciate the time that you've taken and to share so freely and willingly as you always do. Keep on paying it forward, everybody. This will be recorded, or this session has been recorded, and there will be a link that will go around of the recording. So feel free to share this information. We also have a whole range of videos featuring a whole range of different hop thought leaders, like including Bob and others, on our HOPLAB channel. So if you want to check out HOPLAB, all one word, on YouTube, there's something like 70 or 80 videos. Obviously, it's all freely available to use, share, use it internally. We keep on putting it out there and run with it and use it however you see fit. So thanks very much for joining us today. We wish you all the best with your continuing efforts in the hop space, and hopefully see you again.